The 2025 federal election quickly approaching, and today we have the opportunity to discuss some of the issues with the Green Party candidate for the Medicine Hat Cardston Warner riding, Andy Shadrack. So welcome to Bridge City News, Andy.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here this morning.
Well, why don't you first of all tell us a bit about yourself and why you decided to run in this federal election?
Okay, I came to this country in 1970 as an agricultural laborer. I came in on an assisted passage, but I didn't stay in agriculture for very long. I went back to university and I ended up teaching politics
Oh,
for
wow.
13 years in Castlegar and Kelowna in British Columbia. Um, After I was in Regina for a decade, and just after that, I came to Medicine Hat and worked on a study at the college there on retention and recruitment of students. So I know a little bit about Medicine Hat. I'm from BC, and I know quite a bit about agriculture, and that really concerns me. And the reason I jumped in was because I thought we need to have a debate in this election. This is probably one of the most critical elections we've ever had. Clearly, our relationship and economic relationship with the Americans has failed. I doubt very much that we're going to be able to negotiate with Trump in any meaningful way. I'll give you the example of saying, you remember when Neville Chamberlain tried to negotiate with Adolf Hitler and couldn't make a deal? That's the way I feel about our relationship with the Americans right now.
Well, that's one of my questions for you. What's the best way to, deal with the tariffs and Trump, of course? I mean, who's just, very unpredictable, right? And yet, in some ways, he is predictable. But he's going to be unpredictable.
So, my point of view is we've got these tariffs. This is an opportunity from Canadians from coast to coast to have a conversation about what kind of a Canada we want to build, to reset the dial, if you like. Now, a dialogue's already started about getting rid of the barriers to trade within the various provinces. But what is it do we want to build? And I don't know whether you've seen the Elbows Up for Climate Change that was initiated by the mayor of Jasper. It lays out 5 things that we could do in this country. One is build an east-west electrical grid, an efficient energy grid, so that we tie in, instead of trading electricity and fuel with the US, we build it across Canada. The other is to build a rail network with electric buses. The other is to build 2 million homes, non-profit homes. And here I'll raise the fact that the house I live in Caslow is now worth 11 times what it was in 1987. But the minimum wage in BC has only gone up by a factor of 4. So a number of the people I talked to when I was gathering my signatures said they couldn't afford housing. It was a really hard thing for them. 1 in 10 seniors now is in danger of losing their housing in this country. So we really have to address that housing issue.
Okay.
The other thing that we need to think about is, can we retrofit existing housing so that it's warmer in summer and cooler in winter? And then the other thing, when you look at things like Jasper, last year when a third
Hmm.
of the community burnt down, or Lytton, is we need a national body that helps communities deal with climate change events. Maybe we need a wing of the army that helps with that.
Okay.
I was an elected local politician for 9 years in BC and had to deal with a landslide that killed 4 people in the community and destroyed or damaged 25% of the houses. So climate events, when they happen, are really hard to deal with and take a long time to rebuild from.
Right. Although there is debate on that again, is that actually a climate event or is it just simply a natural disaster that happens, right? So, but that's probably a separate show. Yeah, let me, before we get to any more questions here, let me ask you, Andy, what was your reaction to the Leaders Debate Commission, last minute decision here to exclude the Green Party from the debates? Do you feel that your party should have been included?
Yeah, the original inclusion was the party had to have nominated or endorsed people in 90% of the constituencies. And we'd done that. We did not get the 100 signatures for all of those seats. And I can tell you from my experience, increasingly a number of people don't want to sign forms like a nomination paper because they don't want their personal information out there because of all the scams and things that are going on. So I think the party found it harder to get those 100 signatures for the 90% of seats. And so I think the PPC should have been in the debate as well because they were running a majority of people across, in a
Right, and
majority of
I think one of their categories was you have to be polling, I think 4% or higher, and I think that was another strike, I guess, against you there. But it is what it is. I guess we'll see what happens with that. But well, let's get back to some of the questions here. You had mentioned that about building 2 million homes. Now that's a big number. How would you plan on going about doing that?
Well, I think we need to support local government in building housing. Like I grew up under the Conservatives in the UK, and they built public housing. That was one of the things we used to do.
So this is
Now,
government funded, right?
government funded
So where so the
through a
money just
number of
comes
ways.
from tax dollars then, or?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And like when we got our second house in '87, CMHC guaranteed 30% of our mortgage.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now they never had to spend any of that money or any of that guarantee because we met our mortgage
Right.
commitment.
Right.
So we need to look at ways of helping people both home own and rent. We're always going to have people in the community who can't make the market rates.
Right. Of course.
So how do we help them? Because if people don't have stable homes, how do they have stable lives to raise
Oh,
families?
it's a
Work?
huge issue. I mean, you're absolutely right on that, Andy. I guess my question would be again for something like that, 2 million homes. I mean, that's a lot of tax dollars, right? So where do the tax dollars come from? I mean, of course, it comes from you and me. We've got to pay that, right? So somebody's got to have jobs. So my question is again, if it's just the government building homes, how does that impact the private construction industry? They need to make a profit to pay
Yes.
taxes, to build those homes, right? So
Well,
how do you sort that all out?
okay. So I think I'm a fiscal conservative. So I believe that government should balance the budget, shouldn't run deficits, shouldn't have debt, with the exception that if you're investing in homes, you're actually investing in the future. So maybe you regard that as a capital investment.
So you'd be okay with going into debt for borrowing homes?
Yeah,
Or,
for
sorry,
building
building homes, pardon me.
building homes, because that's a capital investment, and you've actually got an asset against that. All right. So that's one way of looking at it. The other thing that I think we have to do is we have to have a fairer taxation system in this country.
Okay, so how would you define a fairer taxation system?
Well, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, corporations and individuals paid the same amount of money. All
Okay,
right.
and you'd like to see a
So I think
return to
we
that?
need to rethink. When I was growing up, we had a higher rate of taxation on wealthier people because they could afford to pay higher taxes. So I think we need to get better. But I'll give you an example, and I suppose this will be a sore point. In Canada right now, we give $19 billion a year in credits and subsidies to the oil and gas industry. But if you look at the wage for the person who heads up Suncor, he makes 729,000. So I guess I ask, why are we giving corporate money to corporations if they're able to pay an executive member 729,000?
Yeah, I
So I
probably
think
wouldn't disagree with you on corporate subsidies. I'm not sure we need to have more of that, right?
that's one way I would save some money.
Hmm.
All right. If you look at, there's a lot of talk about wealth taxes and corporate gains. I see nothing wrong with suggesting we have a wealth tax on someone who owns $100 million. 1% is $1 million on 100. You get to keep 99, but you lose one.
Yeah,
Okay. The
it,
same with billionaires.
it has been tried in a number of countries, but I think there's only about 4 countries in the world that are still doing that. It hasn't had great results. They tend to move to another country and take some of that wealth
Well,
with them. So,
I'm not so sure that happens. Also,
okay.
why have we got all these offshore tax havens? In
Well,
other
yeah, we
words,
could do a whole show on that, couldn't we?
yeah. So I mean, that's the way. that I would do it. I would find money over here to pay for things I want to do over here.
Okay. Well, that probably ties in with the environmental front as well. Of course, the Green Party, that's your main platform, right? Is you want to protect the environment and so forth. So, I mean, how would you go about doing that? Yeah, you mentioned the coast-to-coast electricity grid, and I'm
Yeah.
assuming there's other green energy projects that would go in with that as well. I mean, you probably want to see wind power, solar power, those kinds of things,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
so
I mean, where I would differ probably from the mainstream parties, uh, when I owned a vehicle, I haven't owned a vehicle since 2005. All right. I used to buy um, oil from Alberta through Mohawk and Husky. So I have no problem with the idea of us using oil created in Canada to get rid of oil we import. I think that's a really good idea.
oh, for sure. Yeah, I would
But
agree there.
where I would disagree with Carney and Polyev and your own Premier and Preston Manning is on the need to expand the amount of oil we produce. On the context I'll put it in, I'm running to represent a large number of farmers in Medicine Hat, Cardston, and Warner. And my question to those farmers, probably the majority of whom, I think the Conservative MP got 63% of the vote last time. Yeah. And is okay, we're looking at a 2 to 3 degree rise in temperature. How
So,
are you going to,
2 to 3 degrees. How do you mean? Like when did that
oh,
take place?
between now and say the end of this
Oh,
century,
you're looking ahead. Okay, okay, we haven't
if
seen that. Okay, I got
temperature
you.
increases, how are you going to keep farming your cereals in a situation where the temperature is 2 to 3 degrees warmer, where maybe there isn't as much runoff coming off the eastern Rockies, or there isn't enough precipitation? How do cattle handle that temperature? In other words, when I look at climate change in terms of events that are going on and change, that's why I say we need to limit the amount of oil and gas we produce. We need to make that transition.
So if you say limit, so you're not saying, would you agree? For example, again, I've seen a number of studies showing that green energy, like solar and wind, I mean, they're notorious for being unreliable, right? Sun doesn't always shine, wind doesn't always blow, et cetera. So the current technology that we have, costs are higher for consumers. So should we continue to use fossil fuel in any kind of a transition period that you're talking about here, so that we still have reliable and
Yeah, you
affordable
continue
energy?
to use,
Okay.
but the evidence is at an international level that these clean fuels are cheaper. Let me give you an example of my own situation. All right. In 2005, at our house, we used 6.2 megawatts of electricity. Last year, we used zero point 0.9 off the grid, and our power bill in 2005 was 522 a year. Last year, we paid 355. That's because we have a solar system.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's
That's
cheaper.
something that you used right there. Yeah. I'm just looking at the stats that I've seen on larger power facilities that use wind or solar end up costing
And,
consumers
and then
more
the other thing, if you
overall.
go to
But
somewhere like Australia, they now have huge battery banks. All right.
mhm. Although that again, there's a debate on that though as well. Whether how green that is, considering of course what needs to go into the mining, of course, to produce the batteries, and how do you dispose of them? How do you dispose of the great windmill mills?
Yeah.
They're burying them in the ground and so forth. So there's a lot of back and forth debate on that. We're running out of time though. I do want to give you a chance too to talk maybe about healthcare. I mean, that's probably a big
Yeah.
issue for you as well as the Green Party, right? Any thoughts on
Yeah.
how you'd want to make some changes there?
Yeah. I think there's a real challenge now in rural areas in terms of delivering healthcare. And of course, as you may know, it's the provincial government that's responsible for healthcare. The only thing where the feds are involved is making transfers. So if I was the federal minister of health, I would want to earmark some money for the rural areas to have some mobile clinics.
Okay. Mobile
Okay,
clinics.
so that you take certain specialty people out And the reason I give that example is I have a friend who's in her mid-90s who used to run with her husband, a mobile dental clinic that went out into rural Ontario. The other area around health that I think is really important, I've had a lot of emails from people around MS, cancer, brain injuries, and that is I think we need a guaranteed annual income for people who are facing mental and physical health challenges.
Okay, so a little bit like AISH we have now in Alberta, but you're saying you'd probably want to see that higher, I guess, right? For
Yeah, but if you know people who have long-term illnesses, they don't have the ability to support themselves and they need a bit more help. They need to have some equipment or they need someone to come in and help them do certain things. I just want people to be able to live at a level of dignity and participate.
Thanks for being with us today, Andy. Appreciate it.
Goodbye.